Kia ora, it's Jo Noble here, Chief of Strategy and Science from Gisborne District Council. So I look after all the strategy, policy and planning work that the council does for the community and for the organisation. And we also have our environmental science and monitoring teams that fall within my remit. Just a bit of an introduction, I guess, to the role that council plays in this kaupapa. We try our best to represent the views of the community. The views of iwi hapu Māori landowners are a particularly important part of that community view. Staff provide advice to our councillors, who are our governors. They don't always agree with the advice we give them. Sometimes they make different decisions to the recommendations we give. They always respect our views. And it's really important for us to hear from the community, from iwi, from hapu, from Māori landowners, because that really helps us understand the implications of not only the work that we're doing, but also these big changes at a national level. So one of the questions we were asked to think about is this an issue all Māori landowners in Tairāwhiti should be paying attention to and involved with? And absolutely, my answer would be yes. The proposals have a potential to impact everyone in Tairāwhiti, but I think there are particularly some impacts for Māori landowners. And I'm probably not going to say anything new to many of you, but there's a lot of Māori land in Tairāwhiti. It's nearly 28% of our region, which is a lot given the national numbers. And also much of that land is on some steep and erodible, some really vulnerable land that has to be sort of treated quite carefully. And it also tends to be remote and in an economic sense underutilised. We also know, and I'm sure that again, this is not news to anyone, that the nature of Māori land and the way it's been treated in the past and the legislation that's been imposed over it means that there are additional or different barriers to economic development. You know, the kind of governance structures that need to be put in place, the way that it's hard to access traditional funding from banks and all those kind of additional barriers that freehold title doesn't have. We also know that Māori nationally and in Tairāwhiti have invested heavily in the forestry industry. There's significant forestry assets and knowledge, and a lot of Māori forestry land is located on the East Coast. And that capital investment has grown over time. We also know that climate change will affect forestry productivity in Tairāwhiti, or we think we know, but that's what the information's telling us, you know, with warming temperatures, changing rainfall. So climate change will affect forestry, it will affect us all, and I think these changes that the government is proposing have the potential to impact all of Tairāwhiti, but particularly Māori landowners, both positively and negatively. And then thinking about, is it going to be a good thing or a bad thing? I think there will be pros and cons. You know, it's not easy to be black or white about these things. So I've really thought about how the changes to the emission trading scheme might impact Māori landowners and might impact Tairāwhiti. So on the plus side, and this is from both a financial viewpoint, but also kind of the wider well-being viewpoint, social, environmental, cultural. So as council staff, from the work we've done, we do think it will be a positive to reduce some of those current incentives to convert land and drive land use change in a way that's displacing other productive land uses. We know that there are real concerns out there about potential for rapid land use change and the associated impact that that might have on our communities. We also know that there are some real strong concerns about carbon forestry going in and being, you know, left and not really providing any wider social, cultural, environmental benefits. We do support further incentives for native planting. We think that will have, you know, wider benefits, biodiversity, landscape, cultural. And we think there's real opportunity there and probably some further work and research that needs to be done to understand how investment, particularly Māori investment in Indigenous forestry, could kind of open up a world of opportunities, whether that be looking at sort of bioextractives, rongoa, tourism ventures, just the intrinsic value of having that native bush there. So lots of potential positives there. But then looking at the downside of changing the current emissions trading scheme, particularly that taking out that exotic forestry from the carbon forest category, it does remove some flexibility for landowners. At the moment, they have that ability to plant some of their land in pine and get a really good income source. So it's limiting income sources for some Māori landowners. We do know that there are a lot of pressures on landowners, particularly in primary production. You know, they're needing to fence waterways, they're potentially needing to look for paying for carbon emission reductions for livestock farming. It all takes money. And we know in particular that Māori landowners, I guess they're not just interested in that economic bottom line, they're also using the money they derive from their Māori land trusts to support scholarships, to support kaumātua, to give back to the community. And so having that carbon farming option there does enable some of those wider benefits to be realised. And again, as I've already talked about, whenua Māori has those additional constraints to accessing funding. So carbon farming using pine forestry did present one real opportunity to access additional income streams to support all those other positive works that go on across the four well-beings. There are some concerns, and I think they're real concerns about constraining our ability to meet our emission reduction targets. And, you know, there are some benefits provided by exotic forestry depending on where the trees are planted and what's planted. They can help stabilize banks, they can provide shade, they can provide some benefits beyond just an economic return. And then the last, or second to last question I thought about was, do Māori land block committees understand the significance of this policy? So that's a really big question, and I'm probably not the best person to answer it, but I guess generally, and recognising I'm not a Māori landowner and I've only been in this region for about 4 years, there is a lot of information in the media and social media about carbon farming, and it's sometimes hard, excuse the pun, to see the wood for the trees. I would say that the speed with which this consultation package was developed and then released for comment took us by surprise as a council. So I don't think it's realistic to think all landowners will be up to speed too, and probably not fair either. I know that there is a Tarawhiti Whenua Māori collective that's been considering the proposals. They represent about 40 Māori land blocks, probably some of the bigger land blocks to be fair. But there are nearly 1,600 Māori land blocks registered in Tarawhiti, so that just gives a scale of the number of people you need to reach to talk to about these proposals for everyone to understand what it means for them. And in terms of whether people would be better off or not under the proposals that the government's put forward, I think it really depends on how the land is currently used, you know, where income's currently coming from, what future income streams are being considered, and really what as a Māori landowner your short, medium and long-term goals are for managing the land. Some Māori landowners will be looking at these proposals and thinking, yes, that's great, let's take pine out of the permanent carbon forest. We want to put our efforts into native. That aligns with where we're going. But I know that others, especially those bigger Māori land block owners, are looking at their land, and they really value being able to use a part of their land, not all their land, in that pine forestry, in permanent pine forestry, so that they can generate income streams to facilitate the kind of their longer term vision. They really need to have that reliable income stream that they can rely on. And so overall, do I think the proposal should be supported by landowners? I am definitely not going to tell Māori landowners whether they should or shouldn't support the proposal. I will say that there are several options presented in the discussion paper. And I guess as landowners, whether you support any of those will depend on your aspirations and your values. So there's option one, which is the status quo, basically unlimited exotic and Indigenous registration in the permanent forestry category. Then we've got a second option, which is preventing any exotic forestry registration in the permanent forestry category. And then option 3, which is a more flexible approach that allows some exceptions so that you can use exotic species under certain conditions or criteria. So as council staff, we've been discussing this for the last sort of 2 or 3 weeks, and we're leaning towards option 3. So we as staff don't support totally removing exotic trees from the permanent forestry category, but we do think there needs to be some controls or some ways of managing what goes in. But we do realise that if we create too complex a system, then that becomes too hard to manage and it will all just fall over. But I guess really what it all boils down to is we think we need an emissions trading scheme that is sufficiently flexible to allow for the long-term effects of all plantings, whether they be native or exotic, to be considered, and also to keep that eye on the long-term benefits for a region, and not just economic, but also cultural, social, and environmental, and to make sure allowing enough flexibility to kind of allow landowners to achieve their long-term goals, not just a short-term economic return. So I think I've probably sat on rather uncomfortably on the fence, but it just, I think, highlights how complicated the situation is. And there are lots of shades of grey, or maybe I should say green. And while it's tempting to say, no, just stop the pine being planted as permanent carbon forestry, I am worried that we'll be sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater and preventing a lot of positive things happening that can be funded with that rocket fuel that comes from that pine carbon forest. So that's just a few views from the council. Thank you for listening.